The Unbreakables had several meanings in the book. Sort of what the Unbreakables, um, started her close friendships with women, and that broke. And then as it moves on later, the Unbreakables is a list she makes for herself when she's at ground zero, how she's going to reinvent her life and how she's going to make her comeback, and the things that she really wants that are separate from being, somebody's wife, somebody's mother, but kind of going back to who she is. So these become the Unbreakables for her. So, it evolves in various ways throughout the book. It was so exciting. I mean, I'm sure you could have probably heard my scream from Chicago to Nashville. It was just that moment. My editor called me, my agent, I mean, bawling. My husband he was coming in from some errand, and I was like bawling, and he's there, and he dropped whatever was in his hands, and he's crying. Like, it was a moment that it was, I don't know, it was a great moment because that was definitely on the wish list. But this book, especially in a time of surging anti-Semitism, for me to have this book as a New York Times bestseller means it's being read. And so the message that is beneath the story and beneath the suspense was really about Nazi looted art and what happened. And so that takeaway I knew was getting out there. And then, as you know, Sharon Stone, the actress, picked up the book. And so, as to adapt it into a film. And so it was just, my head was like spinning. After so many years, this is happening. And, it was the long wait, and there it was. And, really a wonderful, wonderful feeling. Everyone, all the characters, their lives and their stories revolve around this painting. So it's almost like Woman on Fire, who's actually the muse, the model, is actually a character in the book. So it's not a fruit bowl or Monet's garden in Giverny. It's actually one of the characters' mother who's posing for this painting. So Woman on Fire is actually the painting, a character in the book who matters to one of the characters going after it. And so everyone is sort of got a stake, in this fire. The book is inspired by the Nazi art hoard, the Munich art hoard, a story that broke in 2013. And so there was in a dilapidated apartment in Munich, discovered 1,500 masterpieces worth $1.5 billion. And we're talking Cezanne, Picasso, Matisse, literally layered like lasagna in a stove, stuffed in his food pantry. Well, it turns out that he was the son of Hildebrand Gurlitt, who was Hitler's dealer in Nazi looted art and degenerate art, it's called. And so Hildebrand Gurlitt died in a car crash, bequeathed all his treasure trove to his reclusive son. Anyway, for example, I had a friend who had a Matisse in that stove, and it's a $30 million Matisse. It took her 9 years to recover. A big case at the Supreme Court of a painting, a Pissarro, took 20 years, where the family actually had the pictures of that painting on their grandparents' mantelpiece. 20 years to get that painting back. So you can imagine what it takes for people. And now it was the children, then the grandchildren, and now 80 years later, it's the great-grandchildren trying to get their families' masterpieces or paintings of whatever level back. And it can be a real mouse chase. So getting to Jules first. Jules is the most me of any character I've ever written. I wrote this book during COVID lockdown, so I was like, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week working on this book lockdown. And I knew I wanted to write a book that had everything in it that I love to write and to read. So it's a bit of a mutt. It's, history, suspense, risky journalistic pursuits, passion, and strong, fiery women. I'm like, all of this in one book. So I went back to the time when I was a young reporter in Jerusalem, particularly. And and I wanted to have this young, idealistic journalist, who was smart, savvy, but who didn't really understand consequences yet. And so I was going to guide her at the end. I knew this was going to happen. I also wanted it to be a woman versus woman showdown. So you're going to have this very unscrupulous, seasoned art dealer who was, through twists and turns, it was going to be between Margot, the art dealer, and Jules Roth, a face-off. And Margot was going to drastically underestimate Jules, who she's like, this is my competition, and and then obviously I was going to bring in some male characters and build the story around it. But when I created Jules, I actually even gave her my own backstory as hers. When I was 17, I was on an internship program with our state capital, and for 6 months. And I was approached by a special law enforcement unit. Would I be willing to be used as bait to help break a sex trafficking ring? And so, of course, I said yes. And in those days, you didn't have to get parental approval. I was 17. There were no phones at the time, no computers. And this was all in real time. And we broke the sex trafficking ring and people were arrested. So this, as you can imagine, was my aha moment that I knew I was going to become a journalist and all the good things that happened after that. But I decided, God, what a perfect story to give Jules as her background. So that was fun to create. And each of the other characters are composites of real life characters in my life, or in the bigger picture. Margot is a composite of a sort of an unscrupulous art dealer, where there are many of those out there. But Margot is sort of my, evil character. But as you know, the best evil characters also have some good inside of them. And the one thing, without giving away any spoilers, that was good about Margot was her connection to the painting. Her connection to the painting was for her grandfather, who was the one person in her life who really loved her. So her motives for going after the painting, which all the characters really are surrounded by the painting Woman on Fire, which I really believe is the protagonist of the book. And so Margot's motives to get the painting back were good and really having to do with her grandfather. So, but she was the most fun character to write, for sure, hands down. When I knew, it was going to be a Margot day of writing, it's maybe I'll have a glass of wine when I get to it, or whatever it is, because you have to go dark, you have to go deep, and you have to really pull a lot of her pain from your own past or things that you do know. When I was doing my research, I kept coming up to this one name, Arthur Brand. I'm like, who is this guy? I've got to find him. So I found him. He's in Amsterdam, and he's known as the Indiana Jones of the Nazi looted art hunting world. And I thought to myself, I'm gonna set up an interview. So we had an interview scheduled in Amsterdam, March 14th, 2020. So you can imagine everything was set. I had to cancel it. But when I told him that I'm creating a character named Bram Baker, who's inspired by you, we developed a relationship, and I read his book and I followed him, and I just all the articles about him and all the crazy things that he did to recover a Nazi looted art forged artworks and works that have been stolen from museums. Like, he's the guy. And interestingly, I had sent him the book, and he just posted about it this week, in fact. And they have a big series on him in the Netherlands called The Art Detective, six shows, 6 episodes, and just a brilliant guy who does the most amazing work. So I knew there was going to be that character. So even though Dan, the top investigative journalist in my book, who's based on editors that I've had in the past, even though he had the goods to find the art, he knew that he needed something more, as you're mentioning, and went about it by contacting and finding Bram Baker, who is inspired by Arthur Brand, the real deal, in Amsterdam. I had inspiration or paintings that inspired me. And, my process, if you could see my dining room table and my kitchen table with the leaves pulled out and all the note cards and sticky notes, very much like Jules Roth in the book, where just trying to put everyone's story, the timeline, and how everyone's going to go about getting this painting together. Then I kind of shove it all aside and sit down and write, and it's in my head. It's kind of the method to the madness. But it really wasn't confusing as I started to write, and especially because it's told in 3 viewpoints, from Jules, the young reporter, Margot, the art dealer, and Ellis, who was going after the painting of his mother.